Having now satisfied myself that Linux runs okay on this machine, and having connected an external USB disk drive, I want to install Linux on it. I'm going to begin that process by clicking on this icon right here that says Install PC Linux OS, and it prompts up help that says Install PC Linux OS Live System to disk. That's what I want to do. But I want to do it in a way that leaves my Windows system intact. In fact, I want to leave my entire Windows hard disk drive untouched. This new frame pops up. This is Drake Live Install. This wizard will help you to install the PC Linux OS distribution. Fine, I'm clicking Next. Whereupon it's going to examine my disk drives and come up with some suggested ways to install. Now, it doesn't know what I have in mind, so it's going to suggest some options that I'm not going to choose. One option that it will suggest is to compress Windows and find extra space in my Windows partition for a new Linux system. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to mess with Windows. It'll also suggest it could wipe out Windows entirely. I don't want to do that. Once it gets done examining my disk drives and makes those suggestions, I'm going to choose an option called custom disk partitioning that allows me to take complete control, and then I can guide it into installing on this second disk drive, which it won't normally do. So we're waiting. Now, this takes a while. This computer in particular has a lot of disk drives connected to it that are not going to be related to this operation, but they do slow things down. I've got a CD-ROM drive and 2 DVD drives and more than 20 USB ports on this machine, a lot of different peripherals, and so it's taking a while figuring all this stuff out. But I have faith that within a minute or so, oh, there it is. Here's a map of suggested options for installing PC Linux OS. It says it could use existing partitions, but I don't want to do that on this disk drive. Notice it says, here's the content of your disk drive, MacStore 7L2. I happen to know that's my Windows disk. If I click on this down arrow, I can see there's a second disk. That's the one I want, a 93 gigabyte USB drive. Its name begins with all these zeros, so we're going to use that one. And to get that, I'm not going to use any of these options. Instead, I'm going to scroll down here and look at custom disk partitioning and click Next. That allows me to look at the entire big picture of all my disk drives. I've got System Disk A and System Disk B, 2 main hard disk drives on this machine. By clicking on either one, I can see the little map. System Disk A is my Windows disk, and these partitions are already in place. They already contain Windows, and a Linux installation is already there. There's some spare partitions that are not even used. I'm not going to mess with this drive at all. I want to leave it completely unaffected. Instead, I'm going to concentrate on this System Drive B, which is right here, and it shows only one partition. It says, please click on a partition. There's only one, and it tells me, let me just expand this out a little bit. It tells me that that is a FAT32 partition, and it's guessing that it's a Windows Drive C. That's just a guess, and it happens to be wrong. It's just a spare drive. But I don't like the FAT32 file system for Linux. So I'm going to take some steps here to change that. First, I'm going to delete that partition. Having selected, I'm clicking delete. And now it's gone. I'm now going to create there some new partitions. I happen to know that I'm going to want to create at least 3 partitions for Linux the way I recommend it being installed. First, I'll need a swap partition. That's always required, and I'm going to create that swap partition right now by making a Linux swap partition. And it's suggesting 8 gigabytes for that, and I'm fine with that. That's about the right size, so I'm leaving that alone. And now we see on this map, I've got 2 partitions, here and here. The swap partition is there, and then there's still this blank area. I'm now going to create a second partition for my root file system. I'm clicking Create. In this case, I want to use the default journalized ext4 file system, but for size, I'm going to go about 15 gigabytes. I find I like about 15 gigabytes for my root partition. So I'm going to mount it at root and clicking OK. So now we've got 2 partitions on that disk drive, but I need a third one for my home. I happen to know this from experience, so I'm clicking here. I'm going to create another partition. Once again, I'm going to do a journalized ext4 file system, which Linux really likes, and for that one, I'm going to give myself about 25 gigabytes. And we're going to mount that on home, and click OK. That's pretty much the way I like to do one of these PC Linux OS installations. A swap partition, a root partition, and a home partition, totaling about 40 gigabytes, about 48 gigabytes of space for this Linux installation. Now I'm also gonna format these partitions. I don't think I need to format the swap partition, but I am going to format my root partition by clicking Format, and it warns me that's going to change this disk drive, and I'm okay with that. It'll take a minute or two to format that root partition, SDB5, it's calling that. So this is SDB partition 5 for root. Formatting it shouldn't take too long at 15 gigabytes, maybe a minute or so. It's normal to see this bar graph advance from left to right several times during that process. So that's been formatted. It says right there, formatted. Next, I'm going to format my home partition by selecting it and clicking Format. It says Formatting Partition SDB6. This will take a little longer because it's bigger. There's 25 gigabytes here instead of 15. As I said before, it's normal to see this bar graph advance more than once, maybe several times from left to right during this formatting process. And that's getting those blank areas all indexed and ready for use. It says it's been formatted. Okay, now that I've given it a plan and told it how I want to allocate the minimum requirements for Linux, I'm going to click Done here. And it asks me, well, what partitions do you want to format again? I don't need to format them. I've already done that, so I can turn those off. We're going to click Next. It's going to now begin the process of copying all those files. I'm warned, once again, that we're going to lose all that data. It says press Next to format the selected partitions. Well, they're already formatted. I think it'll just skip that. I'm going to click Next, and it should begin copying. Yeah, mounting the partitions, and now copying the files. If I look down under my computer, I can see my CD-ROM drive is flashing as it's reading files from the CD-ROM and writing them to those new partitions on that USB external hard drive. This is going to take a few minutes, and as it works, this bar graph is going to advance slowly from left to right all the way across this space. And so I'm going to stop recording this movie. When it gets about here, we'll continue the narration again, whereupon we'll take the next steps, which involve creating a boot up menu on this disk. We'll be back.